Hi, my name is Stanislav Kostyuk and I am a game designer. One of our patrons, Kostiantyn Rytvin, as part of his reward tier has proposed to put Bioshock into the topic votes and it has won. So that's the game we're discussing today, as always with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system. And I will spoil Bioshock completely almost from the get-go, so if you haven't played it in the past 14 years, make sure to do so before watching this video if you don't want spoilers. The footage that you see is recorded from the remastered version of the game, but to be absolutely fair, I can't call it definitive without caveats. It's got developer bonus material, the challenge rooms DLC is already included, better FOV options and more comfortable handling on a controller, so in terms of gameplay it is a definite improvement. When it comes to visuals though, on a strictly technical level it is higher quality than the original, but there are a number of effects that are either missing entirely or lost in translation to more realistic lighting and higher resolution textures and models, affecting the atmosphere. I don't think what has changed makes it look worse, it still looks great, but there are enough differences that one might prefer the darker and glossier look of the original, which is still readily available on PC if you own one. And maybe on PC the original is preferable regardless, because I have heard that even after patches, the PC version of the remastered edition still has significant technical issues. But I can safely say that I have experienced none on consoles. With all this out of the way, let's get to our first Stasocritic category, design. This is the most important part of the scoring system with the biggest weight, 4, as usually the way a game is designed, built and structured is what defines the experience the most. We dissect everything using the top-down approach, starting with high-level vision and moving towards low-level mechanics. We can't talk about Bioshock without mentioning Objectivism. The game is fully built around pushing that philosophy to its extremities. It influences not only the game's design, but also story and aesthetics. All of it is intertwined and not exactly separable, but in the context of this section we'll focus mostly on things that are related to gameplay. Now, I am not an expert in Objectivism, so if you see me saying something that is not true, feel free to correct me in the comments. But broadly speaking, Objectivism is about putting your own self-interest above others, in a society with no governmental oversight on the market. If I understand correctly, this doesn't mean that you should lack any sort of moral compass, as harm of others is not something Objectivism approves, that would be devoid of reason. But the point Bioshock seems to make is that when you keep pushing your self-interest above everybody else's, eventually you lose that sense of morality. And in the context of Objectivism being the core of the entire game, through gameplay specifically, Bioshock attempts to tackle two big topics related to it. Agency, if you are actually free to do what you want to do, and morality, are you willing to do what is beyond your self-interest or not? First, let's talk about agency. Since one postulate of Objectivism is that people are essentially free to do what they want, it is often questioned how much choice does a human being realistically have. And that question is transferred onto Bioshock in gameplay terms. How much choice and agency do players actually have in a game created for them by developers? In the beginning, there is a moment where we are kindly asked to pick up the game's melee weapon, the wrench.
Now, would you kindly find a crowbar or something?
Technically, we can ignore this request, but then we wouldn't be able to progress without anything to break debris with, so we accept the premise that we need the wrench and take it. The game is putting us in a situation where we do what it wants us to do, and we are fine with it. And throughout the levels, while there is some degree of optional exploration or choices, what we're doing most of the time is simply following the compass and enacting what Atlas, essentially our guide in this underwater city of Rapture, tells us. There is a moment where he kindly asks us to lower the weapons, so we wouldn't interfere with the events happening in a room that developers want us to witness. But again, we still have control of the character and are pretty accepting of this fact. And Bioshock wants to put this acceptance over its head. When we are kindly sent to kill the antagonist Andrew Ryan, we find out that everything we have done in the game so far is actually us being mind-controlled by the use of the key phrase, "Would you kindly?"
Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand! Would you kindly? Run! Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys. Kill! A man chooses. A slave obeys. Obey!
What I find really questionable is that when the game mocks us for just blindly following whatever it has to say, it doesn't force us to do anything in what is literally the most important moment of the entire experience. A man chooses, a slave obeys. Iconic quote from this scene, but the game doesn't actually make us obey. It takes control away to do everything for us in a cutscene. We don't get an objective to sit, with the game not progressing until we do that. We don't get an objective to run to a certain point, with the game again not progressing until we do that. We don't actually commit the act of murdering Andrew Ryan, which is something we might not want to do now that the game has called us out and being played for fools, but we would have to if we want to complete it. Yes, it would not have been as cinematic, and the players would probably run around aimlessly for a while, but only because they would want to resist before eventually succumbing to Bioshock's wishes, proving its point. Don't get me wrong, the cutscene is amazing. It is well put, well written, and exceptionally dramatic. And it still has a great impact because it recontextualizes everything that we have done before, so we do feel the shock. And while there is a sense of powerlessness, as we can just helplessly watch, there is no feeling of desperation of not being able to do anything other than the game's objective. And it's so weird because just after this cutscene, you're actually kindly asked to do one more objective, now knowing full well that you don't have a choice but to complete that task even if you try to muck around. So the game still does this very thing that I've mentioned, but after its most important moment, and it doesn't have the same punch, it just can't. Again, don't get me wrong, it's a great plot twist and it works. People wouldn't have talked about it for years if it didn't. But Bioshock had the potential to elevate it even further, and it's clear that it knew how, but it decided to prioritize the drama of a cutscene, and that has led to a huge missed opportunity. And it's not the only one. After all this happens, in the story we get free from Atlas's mind control, but nothing really changes in gameplay to signify that feeling. There are nice little mechanical quirks like Atlas lowering our health as he tries to make sure we die, and our plasmid selection going haywire as a temporary side effect of the cure, and that's cool. There is also a level where we need to complete our objectives without a compass, which is nice, but the level itself is built in the same style as pretty much every other one, a series of cleverly masked, branching linear ordeals with some exploration possibilities. You can argue that's the whole point, freedom in games is always an illusion, but my counterpoint to that would be Fort Frolic. It is a level that feels like no other. You are literally ripped away from the war between Atlas and Andrew Ryan into something absolutely unrelated. And unlike previous levels, this one is a progressively unlocking open environment. And like in one of those last levels, the compass is utilized less and less until it fully disappears for half of the experience. And at the end of it all, there is a choice that is entirely up to you, to the point that it is not even labeled as a choice. To spare Sander Cohen and leave him to his madness, or kill him for what he has done, with consequences that won't be clear until later in the game. Yes, it is all still within the limits of what the developers have provided, but it's a level where you have actual agency, and feels like it was supposed to be a teaser for what the game would become after you stop being a puppet. But the game never really doubles down on those feelings. If it was indeed the plan to do so, perhaps the developers didn't have time to make the last act in such a style a reality. So we have a weird situation when it comes to Bioshock's exploration of agency. The twist is great and is smartly set up thanks to good level design, clever writing, and different interesting moments. At the same time, the implementation of the twist moment itself is questionable. The emotional impact would have been even greater had it been done in the same playable vein as the setups and the immediate aftermath. Not to mention, the resolution of the twist is disappointing from the gameplay perspective, even though what could have been is teased in one of the levels in the middle of the game. So in short, great concept and it works, but doesn't fully stick the landing. It still sticks the landing more than the handling of the question of morality. Bioshock asks, would you do what is morally right but against your self-interest, or would you prioritize your personal gain? Throughout the levels you come across little sisters, protected by the monster's big daddies. Little sisters collect Adam, the genetic material that everyone in the game is after, because it provides the possibility to iron plasmids and tonics, superpowers in other words. And after you kill the big daddies protecting them, you get a choice. You can either harvest all Adam they have, but kill the girls in the process, or you could transform the girls and save them, but get much less Adam as a result. And considering that Adam is your main way to gain upgrades to plasmids and tonics, in principle this is a very interesting dilemma. Only in practice it doesn't matter. If you save the little sisters, every once in a while you get significant Adam rewards, thus almost nullifying the tangible difference you get from this choice. You still will be able to fully spice yourself up with a bunch of powers. So what is morally right is also in your self-interest, and it doesn't even come off as a surprise. You are told you will get rewarded pretty much from the get-go.
Use this. Free them from their torment. I will make it to be worth your while. Somehow.
The only tangible effect these choices have is which of the two ending epilogue cutscenes you will see, both of which feel tacked on. So an interesting conceptual question is rendered absolutely moot by lack of gameplay consequences. But even if I would get less Adam, every time I finish Bioshock I do so with a bunch of it unspent, even considering that I would buy stuff I end up not using. The scarcity of Adam matters only if you don't explore. When you do, you'll find so many tonics, which are passive soluble upgrades, that most of them won't get any use at all. And the game is built specifically to explore, that's pretty much the core loop. You get into a room, clear it out of enemies, and scavenge for resources. That's what you'll basically be doing throughout the entire game. Even on higher difficulties with fewer resources, Adam doesn't pose too big of an issue, because there is a dominant strategy introduced to you right at the beginning. Electroshock an enemy and hit them with a wrench, the 1-2 punch as Atlas calls it.
Give them the combo. Zap them, then whack them. 1-2 punch. Remember, the 1-2 punch.
You can get just an insanely ridiculous value out of range damage thanks to tonics that increase it 1000% when stacked, as well as additional damage bonus from research photos. The latter, by the way, is a pretty cool mechanic where you have to sacrifice damage to enemies to take photos of them instead, so it would be more effective against them later. But it's also really easy to just quickly take a photo and then dispose of the enemy. In the end, most active superpowers other than electroshock aren't really useful unless you come across a place where they are required. And most weapons aren't really necessary as well, though some can be very helpful and powerful in specific situations when upgraded. All this is worsened by the fact that Bioshock's core mechanics are functional, and that's about it. Look, there are undoubtedly interesting interactions. Killing splicers by throwing corpses at them is definitely memorable, but it all feels so floaty. The difference between electroshock of level 1 and electroshock of level 3 is purely technical, statistical. You don't actually feel that it's more powerful. No controller vibration, no screen shake, no slight stopping of movement when you cast it to feel the punch, nothing. And all weapons largely feel the same. There is not a lot of difference between how a pistol or a shotgun or a grenade launcher are handled. Yes, they do have different effects, but there are no game feel elements that make you feel the distinction. The Big Daddies, on the other hand, are actually oozing with game feel. When you fight them, there are all these screen shake effects, the blurs from their powerful hits and so on, but it comes from them, not your player character. And it is really disappointing that when at the end of the game you actually become a Big Daddy, outside of the vision being distorted by the helmet, there are no tangible gameplay differences, even when you put on their heavy boots. And the iconic drill and rivet gun never become usable weapons. So the systemic, mechanical aspect of Bioshock is not actually that interesting. Though you can always force yourself to utilize a larger variety of plasmids and weapons, at harder difficulties kinda do, but then again the one-two punch exists, and it is an insanely dominant strategy. Where Bioshock's real strengths lie is in proper setups. I will refer to Fort Frolic again because it houses an exceptionally memorable encounter that will show what I'm talking about. In any other situation, such running around and hidden splicers would feel pretty boring actually. But when it is set up as this twisted, violent dance, it becomes a totally different experience. The lighting, the music, the atelier environment, all that comes together to elevate functional but boring gameplay into something that you will remember, that I still remember ever since 2007. This is where Bioshock excels. When you reach Rapture in the beginning, there is a moment where a spider splicer is after you. She can't kill you actually, but you don't know that, and you are really stressed out about her appearing at any moment. And then there is no mention of spider splicers at all until a couple of levels in, once you reach Neptune's bounty. Oh shit, it's her again. I will just let you watch this footage so you would not only see the visuals, but hear the sounds and music that accompanies it. All this is so tense. So when the spider splicer comes and you have to fight her for the first time, it is an exceptionally scary moment. Unless you have happened to bring a security drone alongside you, in which case the splicer will not attack you at all and you don't have to worry about survival. Bioshock's scripted moments don't go well together with unscripted gameplay elements, even something as basic as camera movement. There was this one place where I wanted to take an item from a table, and I wanted to do so quickly so I would be able to turn around as soon as I pick it up to make sure nobody attacks me from behind. Only as I try to do that, the camera forces me to look back again at the table, so now I know that there is going to be something behind me and the surprise is ruined. Honestly, sometimes it feels like the game doesn't expect you to play it, and that is most evident with the audio diaries spread all around Rapture. Conceptually, they exist so you wouldn't have to stop the flow of the game to be able to learn about the lore and history of the city. Great! Practically speaking, it doesn't work like that. If you try to use a vending machine or participate in Bioshock's boring but necessary hacking minigame, you will find that you can neither see subtitles, nor are the sound levels adapted to let you hear anything from that diary.
I can see the Adam oozing out of the corner of her mouth, is thick and green. Her filthy hair hanging in her face, dirty clothes. That dead glow in her eye. I feel hatred, like I never felt before, in my chest, bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe. And suddenly I know, it is not this child I hate.
If you decide to explore the world, you can get into a combat encounter and lose focus on what the person in the diary is talking about. Not to mention a story conversation can interrupt everything, and sometimes those happen right near the spot where you find a diary in the first place.
If things weren't bad enough, it seems that even our water system sprung a leak. Yep, that's right. Irrigation system in Arcadia is taking on seawater. What's up? You have the research camera? Good. Guess it's time to get to work for old Peachy.
So the safest way to listen to Diaries is just not do anything, but even that is not foolproof, as while you're listening a random or a scripted enemy can barge in on you. And I would say that audio diaries are really important. You will not get the same appreciation for the story without them, so it is disappointing that a lot of times their existence is not accounted for by level design. Now, the level design, if you take a look at it in separation from a hefty number of flawed system interactions, is great. It is definitely Bioshock's strongest point design-wise. And the biggest reason why is how well everything is connected together. The aforementioned setups, the layouts, the environmental storytelling and the visual style. You might remember I've mentioned before that Bioshock levels are masked to linear environments with branching. And this is not a criticism, it's a really smart way to do complex levels that don't feel overwhelming to explore. Let's take a look at an example. This is part of the medical pavilion map. Now it may seem like a pretty complex environment, but it can be divided into distinctive thematic chunks. The entrance, the first hall, the cure-all office, the waiting area, the dandy dental, painless dental, and chomper's dental. It's like a tree where you don't need to worry about exploring multiple branches at once, not to mention that the critical path for completion is fairly straightforward. The only necessary place is dandy dental, the rest is absolutely optional. By using this style of level design, Bioshock can make sure even intimidating looking maps like Arcadia are fairly straightforward to explore. You always think in segments which are part of or connected to the critical path. Even Fort Frolic, the level that I mentioned feels unlike any other, still divides everything in chunks, only they are connected to loops rather than linear paths throughout the environment, making it a lot more open. This design fits especially well the mall thematic of the level. And even the Art Deco style has an influence on level design. Not only does it add a distinctive visual charm to Bioshock as a whole, but by using it strategically on different objects, the game defines consistent language and clarity of the environment. A good example is doors. There are many types of doors, but you will always know what object is one, as even those that are in very industrial environments have a bigger focus on Art Deco characteristics than the walls and objects around them, where this style is more subdued or absent. So you can see why it can be difficult to talk about Bioshock's design separately from everything else. So many things play off each other. But still, that is the aspect that affects the Cohesion category. When it comes to design specifically, Bioshock has got great levels with a lot of memorable moments, and for the most part succeeds in its gameplay exploration of agency. But the rest is not up to par. Core gameplay is functional but unimpressive. I would be glad to never see the connecting tubes hacking minigame ever again. There's the final boss battle that I didn't mention at all before because there really is nothing to mention, you just run around in circles. A number of systems conflict with the ways Bioshock tries to tell its history, lack of game feel, pointless morality choices, there are just a lot of things that don't quite work. And I will be honest, before I started writing the script, the score that I chose for Bioshock's design in my Stasocritic system was 8. I knew it was flawed, but the levels are just so good, right? But after writing all these arguments, it is a 7 for design. Yes, it is solid, but a lot of things about it are enjoyable thanks to the world and art and story and how it all connects to gameplay, but not the gameplay itself. So let's talk about all of these other things, starting with context. This category is about everything that provides context to our actions: world, plot, characters, motivation, etc. It has the weight of 1, as most of the time context is not something that defines the experience, but does enhance it. The star of Bioshock is definitely the setting, the underwater city of Rapture. It fits perfectly with the exploration of Objectivism up to an extreme. If the philosophy is about celebrating and rewarding hard work of each individual person, what achievement could be more grand and fitting than an entire city built underwater? What could represent determination, ingenuity and merit more than doing the impossible? But we'll never see Rapture in its prime. Because even when you feel an enclosed space with people who are worthy, people who are exceptional and deserve recognition for the merits, somebody will still be richer. Someone will be smarter, more talented. Ultimately, as one character in the game puts it, someone would still have to scrub the toilets. And of course, considering this kind of job would not be meeting the person's ambitions when they arrived in such a city, they would be very discontent. And that can be taken advantage of, especially when something as powerful as genetically modifying Adam is discovered. And I'm not going to retell the whole history of the city here. My point is, there are a lot of fantastical elements to the setting, but everything has logic to it. Events start out with one man having a lot of willpower to push his dogma to the extreme, and when you uncover the chain of events that has led to the rise and decline of the city, from failure of philosophy to personal hypocrisy, it all makes sense and provides a very fascinating image. You learn that history not only through audio diaries, but smart environmental design as well. For example, close to the beginning of the game, you see the remains of a 1959 New Year's party, and this instantly gives you understanding when everything went to hell. Environmental design also provides more insight into the city's culture, how it was structured, how plasmids have infiltrated every aspect of people's lives here. Lives that were irredeemably changed. The history of Rapture is not just what has happened to the city, but also to its people. How they have gradually lost their mind, and how those who try to remain sane have tragically failed in one way or another. For example, Dr. Steinman, an exceptional plastic surgeon who was invited to Rapture for his outstanding expertise, before eventually falling into madness. Listening to the audio diaries about this person gives humanity to somebody who is quite frankly not that interesting in the context of the events happening during Bioshock in particular. Steinman is just essentially one other crazy splicer, just stronger than others. And while you are listening to all these diaries, the story of all these people, their struggles, you can't help but think, this is the story I would like to experience, what I want to see, not whatever is actually happening in the game now. Don't get me wrong, what Bioshock does with its world is great, and if the game would have been set at the time of its decline, we honestly wouldn't get such a large fabric of different characters, perspective and tragedies. A lot of it works because the game provides us important deep bits, while the imagination fills the rest. So uncovering what has happened in the aftermath of all these events is done perfectly well. But it also serves as a huge contrast to the story, the plot of Bioshock itself. It is not a game where the plot is not important, where you just have general motivation and the rest is about this history. There is a series of events. You are a particular character named Jack who crashes on a plane right near Rapture, meets this person Atlas who asks to save his wife and child while the founder of the city, Andrew Ryan, tries to stop you from suing what he sees as further chaos. And all that is just boring. The Andrew Ryan you hear when you first go down the bathysphere to Rapture, when you collect different audio recordings of him, is far more interesting than the Andrew Ryan who actively talks to you during Bioshock events, or is just mostly about us being a parasite and wondering who we are. Pretty much everybody is far more interesting in the recordings than in person, with one exception, Sander Cohen from the Fort Frolic level. Yes, I have talked about that level a lot, but Cohen is fascinating even when you don't listen to any of the lore. He is crazy and out of his mind, yet has his own sense of respect, honor and dreams to attain. His goal of creating art with photos of dead people who have betrayed him is far more intriguing than the power struggle between Atlas and Andrew Ryan. The big difference in narrative style between Fort Frolic and everything else is that we arrive at the moment where the story of the character hasn't yet reached its conclusion, with us just witnessing the aftermath. There has been a lot that has happened before our entrance, but we are the ones who actually bring closure, and that is probably why this part of the game resonates with people the most. And it is saying something when a level that has pretty much nothing to do with the rest of Bioshock has a better story and characters than the main plotline, which mostly hinges on the twist. Sure, the twist is great, but it's not enough to propel the plot, which actively falls apart after said twist. We become a big daddy, which should feel impactful, but it is not, because the reason we do that is to open a door. And the consequences of this irreversible act is that we lose our voice. One that we hear only as grunts anyway. The only lines of dialogue we have as Jack is in the beginning cutscene. Atlas is revealed to actually be another person from Rapture's history, Frank Fontaine, and his plan is to take over the world, I guess? I don't even know, but we have to fight him as this blue giant at the end. The epilogue puts a lot of focus on the fate of the Little Sisters, but that doesn't feel emotionally rewarding because the stakes for that were never set up. So if we take a look at all the possible scores for context, feel free to pause if you want to read them all, it would be an 8. The setting is awesome, the world building is fantastic, the history is fascinating and also shown very well through environmental design, but the front-facing aspects of the context, the actual plot, characters and interactions with them, while they do have their moments, overall are deeply disappointing and fall apart. Let's discuss aesthetics now. So this is another category with a weight of 1, again because it does not define the experience, but greatly enhances it, this time through visual style, music, sound effects, etc. And I don't think we will spend too much time talking about this section, because honestly I think a lot of things I have shown before do talk for themselves. When it comes to visuals, the Art Deco is definitely fitting the grandeur of such a huge underwater project. But what makes Bioshock look really unique is the mix of that style with rust and pipes and dark heavy metal, all those things that are required for a city to function in the water. It adds the sense of realism to a deeply unrealistic and fantastical place, and I think that's great. As mentioned in the beginning, there is quite a difference between the way the original and remastered versions look like, but even though the new version is different, it still shows great interplay between light and shadows. The sun trying to get through all the water into windows of these buildings at the bottom of the ocean, the neon lights adding color to the ocean space. It is kinda interesting how there is actually just one single backdrop for all windows, which can lead to a curious situation where you see Fleet Hall while you are in Fleet Hall. But I don't judge the game at all for this. I think it is quite smart, as usually people don't pay too much attention to looking outside the windows. They're too stressed out regarding what happens inside. The sound effects are sublime. I have already shown examples of Bioshock using its level design, sounds and music to create just really tense situations. Speaking of music, it is utilized very strategically. Bioshock doesn't have a constant musical presence, and half of what is there is actually licensed music from 1920s, 30s, 40s that you hear diegetically from phonographs in the world, and the other half is music composed for the game to magnify the moments that you experience. One of my favorite examples is Dancers on a String. It gives this tragic feeling, reminiscence of a failed past and hope for a better future. Together with some greatly written and voiced dialogue, it does play on your heartstrings. Let's just open up the score list and say straight out the way that Bioshock is at 10. Not only does it have a great, unique and consistent style, it also knows how to utilize it for emotional response. Time to talk about Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it is all about how well the game connects all its different aspects together to form a wholesome experience. And you know what? I will just play a segment from the very first level.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well.
This is what different aspects of the game playing off each other means. The level design, where you're drawn to a mysterious lighthouse, with lights gradually revealing what is inside, followed by descent into the water. The writing and acting of a man with conviction. Regardless of your philosophical beliefs, it is hard to listen to Andrew Ryan at this moment and not be at least a little bit hyped up about what he says. And then the grand reveal of a majestic city, accompanied by amazing visuals and music that is both epic and mysterious. And you've seen throughout the video how difficult it has been for me to talk about pretty much any of Bioshock's aspects in total separation from one another. Before talking about game loops in the design section, I had to set up the theme of objectivism and its importance. I couldn't talk about levels without mentioning the chosen art style. It is all very intricately woven together. There are a lot of nice little things like chains and Jack's arms representing his hidden captivity, the Big Daddy helmet covering parts of the screen when you put it on, though weirdly enough our hands are still shown like they're in a sweater. Which reminds me, our main character is in a sweater. First-person shooters practically never do that. This may sound silly, but I think that's neat. I do wish I could have put a 10 for Cohesion because the game is just so holistically wholesome. And if it would try to only tackle the question of agency, I would, despite the missed opportunities. But we can't ignore the failure to tackle the question of morality, which affects the entire experience. It is a big part of Bioshock that serves no gameplay purpose. In terms of narrative, instead of some ambiguity, it plays the good and evil card straight, with two different and honestly kinda pointless endings, and that's far from an easily ignorable flaw. So Bioshock gets a 9 for Cohesion. And with that said, we move on to our final category, emotions. This is the most subjective category of Stasocritic, but also the second most important one with a weight of 3, and that is because personal feelings matter a whole lot in an experience. And I will be honest, I think Bioshock as it relates to my personal emotions is a great example to why my Stasocritic system is fair. I have been figuring it out for 4 years, that's a very long time, with a lot of different variations, categories, criterias, and a very big important factor for me was for the system to be fair. It still would never be fully objective because it is impossible, but I needed to make sure that whatever I say, think is scored appropriately. I mention all this because I don't love Bioshock. Never did, even back in 2007 when it was all the rage. I think it's fine, I enjoyed playing it, but if you'd ask me for an abstract rating from 0 to 10, I would choose 6, 7 at most. There are just so many games that I have always loved more than the first Bioshock. So with that in mind, you'd think that the score for emotions in my book would range from 5 at worst to 8 at most, but I'm actually putting a 10. Here's the thing, even though I still don't love Bioshock, I do appreciate it a lot. I appreciate it for its design, as flawed as it can be in some aspects, for its themes, world, aesthetics, how it connects it all together through the philosophy of objectivism. It does a lot of great stuff. But more than that, it did have an impact on me. The time you first see Rapture, the dance in Fort Frolic, the conversation with Andrew Ryan about "would you kindly" phrase, and more. Those moments are ingrained in my mind. They have stayed with me throughout half of my life. I don't love Bioshock, and yet still I have discussed it a lot, used as a reference sometimes. Honestly, I don't know if the evolution of my game design knowledge and opinions would have been the same without Bioshock. So it has absolutely transcended the pure gameplay experience and is part of me, and that's why it gets a 10 for emotions. Would it have the same impact if I would play it for the first time now? Probably not, but then again, this is why this category is still the most subjective one. Let's wrap things up now, shall we? So after all scores and weights are taken in together, Bioshock receives a Stasocritic rating of 84. Now I do need to point out two things here. First, Stasocritic, even when argumented, is not an objective scoring system of any kind. It is a representation of my opinions and arguments within a number, and ultimately is there just for fun. It is the opinions and arguments themselves that are important. Second, I have specifically balanced the system in such a way that it's incredibly difficult to get beyond 90+, to avoid inflation of such scores. And if a title gets 80 or more, it means that it's truly great. And I hope you didn't skip the emotion section, cause there I tell you how I try to keep everything absolutely fair. I still don't love Bioshock, even after replaying it again to record footage for this video. To me it's just fine. But when you actually break it down, you can't ignore all the great things that it does, nor you can dismiss its historical importance for video games. Some people say that Bioshock proved that games can be art. I personally don't think that we ever need to prove anything. What we can do though is enjoy a high-quality, historically important video game that I do recommend to everyone. Thank you all for watching. If you have any comments about Bioshock or my critique, be sure to leave them below. I will be happy to participate in the discussion. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and consider supporting my campaign at patreon.com/Farlands if you like what I am doing. My patrons get early access to scripts and videos, can vote for and suggest future topics, and if you are a game developer yourself, there is a special tier if you want your game to be dissected on my channel. Please check it out, and a huge thank you to everyone who already supports me.